Over the past 2 decades, the Harry Potter franchise has met phenomenal success. Since the release of the first novel on the 26th of June 1997, the books have found immense popularity, critical acclaim, and commercial success. They have been distributed in over 200 countries, translated into 68 languages, and have sold over 400 million copies worldwide. The last 4 books consecutively set records as the fastest selling books in history. And as many of you already know, the original 7 books were adapted into an 8-part film series by Warner Bros. Pictures, which has become the second highest grossing film series of all time, just behind the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, with franchises this big, there's always going to be differences between the books and films. The same can be said for just about any franchise. Whenever there's more than one medium, fans will always debate on which is more canon, the adaptations or the original source material. Many of you might be thinking, oh, this is easy, gamer guy. Of course the original source material will always be the most canon, period. Well, it's not that simple. Comic books constantly get retconned and rebooted every couple years, whilst the movies flow and connect in a continuous cinematic universe, that is, if it doesn't get rebooted as well. Even in Dragon Ball, the manga is quite different than the anime, which tends to have more filler. Fans like to dispute on whether the manga is more canon or the anime. And don't even get me started with the Sonic video games versus the comics. Therefore, when we look at the Harry Potter books and films, we should keep in mind that they are both different canons. Harry's personality on film is not the same as Harry's personality in the books. In the books, he's more blunt, stubborn, and occasionally makes snap judgments. In the movies, he's more assertive, level-headed, and copes far better when obstacles are thrown his way. Also, Harry's parents in the movies look like full-grown adults, well into their 30s or 40s, whereas in the books they were barely 21 when they were murdered by Lord Voldemort. Then there's the more trivial differences, like Voldemort's eyes being red in the books versus blue in the movies, or Book Ron having freckles and Book Hermione having buck teeth. But what I want to discuss is more of a theory, and a drastic one that some of you might disagree with. The Harry Potter books and films are not only different canons, but they're set in completely different timelines. This is something I've been thinking for several years. I came to the realization that Harry, Ron, and Hermione in the books are living in a different time period than the Harry, Ron, and Hermione in the movies. In the books, Harry Potter is born in the year 1980 and attends Hogwarts in 1991 when he turns 11, so the books are set in the 90s. However, in the movies, Harry Potter is born in 1990 and attends Hogwarts in 2001. So the series is supposed to be set in the 21st century instead, in the early 2000s to be more precise. And I'm not just saying this because the first movie literally came out in 2001, but the Harry Potter series are fundamentally 21st century. J.K. Rowling is an amazing and imaginative author, but if there's one thing I always disagreed with her on, it was the timelines of the characters. There are some inconsistencies in the books too that proves that the events of Harry Potter did not take place in the 90s. Let's start with the book, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. In the beginning of the book, Harry's horrible relatives, the Dursleys, give their son Dudley a PlayStation 1 for his birthday. Of course, Dudley, being the spoiled teenage brat that he is, threw it out of the window. This was the summer of 1994. The only problem is that the PlayStation wasn't on the market in Britain at the time. The PlayStation 1 was released in the fall of 1995 in the United States and the United Kingdom, and even though Japan had it early in 1994, that was December 1994. So how in the world did Dudley get a PlayStation 1 in July of 1994, 5 months before it was released in Japan? That doesn't make any sense at all. But I won't fault J.K. Rowling for that. She wrote Goblet of Fire in 2000, and I'm sure she's not the most knowledgeable when it comes to video games. There's actually a couple of posts online where people talked about this huge book error, but that's the only real timeline error I can think of from the books. Now let's compare the books to the movies, and why I think the movies are set in the 21st century. In the book Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, in the year 1996, the Death Eaters attacked the Muggles on London Bridge, an iconic landmark in the UK. But in the movie, they attacked the Millennium Bridge. The Millennium Bridge was built on June 2000, clearly not in the 90s. In my revised timeline for the movies, this should have taken place in the year 2006 instead of 1996. And unlike the PlayStation release date, this is no movie error. It was intentional, done by director David Yates, who wanted to put a more contemporary look and feel to the Harry Potter movies. And he continues this in the later movies too. In the movie Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1, when Harry, Ron, and Hermione are fighting the Death Eaters in the cafe, a Muggle waitress is seen listening to her MP3 player, oblivious to what's going on. In the book, this scene takes place in 1997, but I highly doubt people were jamming to little iPods or MP3s back then. Back then, CD players and Walkmans were all the rage. Also, later on in the movie, when Harry dances with Hermione to cheer her up, they dance to a song called "Oh Children" by Nick Cave. That song was made in 2004, and director David Yates chose this song on purpose. In an interview, he said that originally they were going to choose the song "Hallelujah" by Leonard Cohen, which came out back in 1984, and would have fit the timeline perfectly, right? This was another intentional decision made by the director. Another obvious thing to take notice of is that the characters in the movies do not dress like people from the 90s. Now, I grew up in the 90s, so I definitely remember how people dressed back then. In the movies, the costume designers don't even try having the Muggles or wizards and witches dress in 90s outfits when they're not dressed in wizard robes. So, since we've established now that the Harry Potter movies take place in the 2000s, does this screw up the entire timeline of events? Not at all, as this just affects the number of years something took place. Like for instance, when J.K. Rowling said Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them takes place 70 years before Harry Potter, that could mean anything. It could be 70 years before he was born, which would still be in the 90s when Harry was a kid, growing up in the Dursleys' house. When I first read the books in late 1999, I felt like I was growing up with Harry and the characters throughout the early 2000s. We all did. And when J.K. Rowling released the final book in 2007, to me, that was symbolic, because that was when the battle between good and evil ended, no matter what timeline Harry Potter took place. J.K. Rowling's story can rightly be classified as a contemporary coming-of-age tale. So, to the person who picks up the books or watches the movies for the first time, this is in your timeline now. It's your story.